Right now, while you are watching this, your roof is acting like a heat collector. Not just a cover over your head, not just a layer that keeps rain out. A heat collector. That dark surface above you is taking sunlight, hour after hour, storing that energy, and then pushing it down into the rooms where you are trying to live. Every time your air conditioner kicks on, you are paying money to fight a problem your own roof is helping create. That should bother you. Because the thing that changed this subject for me was not a bigger AC system. It was not a smart thermostat. It was not a contractor with a promise that one more upgrade would finally solve everything. It was a cheap white mineral, and the people who kept pointing back to it were the Amish. Before we go further, one honest note: some visuals in this video are AI-assisted illustrations. They are not archival footage, and they are not meant to fake reality. They are here to make heat flow and old building methods easier to see. But the science, the materials, and the cooling logic in this video are grounded in real-world heat transfer and documented passive cooling methods. The first time I stepped into one of those old farmhouses in August, I expected trapped heat and stale air. Instead, the house felt steady. Not refrigerated, not artificially cold, just calmed out. There was no compressor humming, no vents blowing, no thermostat on the wall. And that forced a question I should have asked much earlier. If this house is comfortable without paying to overpower the heat, the way modern houses do, what is it doing differently? The answer starts with one mistake most homeowners never realize. They are making you think your cooling bill is the price of summer. It is not. A big part of that bill is the price of letting your roof become hot in the first place. Most people think heat gets into the house because the outside air is hot. That sounds reasonable, but it misses the main fight. The Department of Energy has said for decades that most of the heat entering through a roof arrives as radiant energy, not just as warm outdoor air drifting into the attic. Sunlight hits dark shingles. The roof surface absorbs that energy, and the whole roof system starts acting like a giant thermal battery. On a brutal summer day, a dark asphalt roof can become dangerously hot. The attic below it can turn into a punishing chamber of stored heat. Once that happens, the space below your ceiling is no longer being cooled in peace. It is being loaded from above, hour after hour. That is why your AC keeps running. Not because it is always broken, not because your house is always a disaster, but because the machine is being asked to push back against a heat source that should have been weakened long before the heat reached the rooms below. If you do not control the roof, you end up paying to cool the house after the damage is already inside. And that is where the Amish approach is different. They do not start with the question, how do we remove the heat after it gets in? They start earlier. How do we stop inviting that heat inside in the first place? That one shift explains almost everything. Amish houses traditionally rely on choices that reduce solar gain before it builds momentum. Lighter and more reflective exterior surfaces, metal and slate roofs, instead of always relying on dark, heat-hungry materials, lime wash on walls, barns, foundations, and sometimes roofs, wide porches and overhangs to shade the walls, high ceilings that keep the hottest air farther above the occupied zone, thick walls with thermal mass that slow heat movement, windows placed to create cross-ventilation, and in many cases, separate summer kitchens so the heat from baking and boiling never enters the main living area. That matters, because what they built was not one trick, it was a whole attitude toward heat. They did not treat summer like a mechanical emergency. They treated it like a design problem. And the cheapest, it is cheap. It is old. It is simple. And because it is simple, a lot of people dismiss it. History does not. Bright mineral coatings and whitewashed surfaces keep showing up across thousands of years of hot climate building. Minoan structures, Egyptian buildings, Persian passacool. If the surface facing the sun reflects more and absorbs less, time staying livable. Modern science says the same thing. Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory compared a dark roof with one coated in a bright mineral slurry based on powdered limestone and water. Same weather. Very different thermal behavior. The bright roof ran much cooler at the surface, and the temperature below it dropped to no compressor. Just a surface that reflected more and absorbed less. Your roof is not neutral. It is either helping the sun or resisting it. And most roofs in America are helping the sun. So why are dark roofs still everywhere? Only about physics, and starts becoming about economics. Material like hydrated lime is too cheap to support a giant modern revenue stream, or high-margin specialty coatings. Industry groups tied to cool roof standards doubt about mold, condensation, and supposed cold climate disadvantages. Cheap fix rarely gets promoted the way a profitable system does. And that brings us to the practical move. That is why this topic is not just about science. It is also about what gets talked about, what gets ignored, and what kinds of solutions people are taught to see as serious. The source material points to industry, groups tied to dark roofing products, pushing back against cool roof standards and reflective roof requirements. It points to lobbying, doubt, mold fears, condensation fears, and the steady resistance that often appears whenever a simple low-cost fix threatens a more profitable system. In some places, even homeowners associations make reflective roofs harder to adopt, even when the logic behind those rules collapses under real summer heat. So, this is not just a knowledge problem. It is a conversation problem. A simple, cheap fix rarely gets promoted the way a profitable, complex system does. And that brings us to the practical part. Because if you already own a house, this only matters if you can actually use it. The first move is lime wash. The source material specifically mentions Type S hydrated lime, sold at ordinary hardware stores for a price so low that the title nearly writes itself. Depending on where you live, one bag is cheap enough to make most homeowners suspicious. We have been trained to assume that meaningful cooling improvements must be expensive. So when something costs less than a takeout order, people assume it cannot be serious. That reflex is expensive. The method is simple. Mix 1 part hydrated lime with about 2 parts water until the consistency is closer to thin milk than thick paint. Stir, eat smooth. Then use a roller or a wide masonry brush to apply it across the roof surface. Let the first coat dry fully, then apply a second coat. That is not glamorous, but it is practical. You are changing the roof from a dark heat-absorbed skin into a brighter reflective surface that rejects more sunlight before that energy has a chance to build attic pressure. And yes, it does weather over time. Rain breaks it down. UV wears it down. You will need to reapply it periodically. That is not a fatal weakness. That is just maintenance. One system asks for a few dollars in a weekend. The other asks for thousands up front and then keeps charging you in the form of electric bills. Lime has other benefits too. Historically, it has been valued not only as a bright reflective coating, but also for antibacterial behavior, antifungal behavior, and fire-resistant properties. On some surfaces, it is less inviting to certain destructive insects. So, you are not just reflecting sunlight. You are using a building material with a long record of helping protect structures. That is, layer 1. Reflect more, absorb less. But if we stop there, we still miss a large part of the heat pathway. Because even if the roof absorbs less heat, some radiant energy still makes it into the roof system. That is where layer 2 comes in. Radiant barrier foil. This is where the whole approach becomes much stronger, because now you are not only changing the roof surface, you are also interrupting radiant heat before it fully loads the attic. The source material ties this idea to reflective foil logic that also appeared in aerospace-era temperature control. The exact history matters less than the mechanism. A reflective foil barrier can intercept infrared radiation before that energy turns the attic into a second sun. This is the part many homeowners were never really taught. Most of us were trained to think about attic insulation almost entirely through fiberglass. And fiberglass does matter, but it mainly helps with conduction and convection. It slows heat, moving by contact, and heat moving through moving air. What it does not address especially well is the radiant side of the problem. And if radiant energy is the dominant load coming through the roof, then you can see how homeowners get trapped. They buy a partial answer and are told it is the whole answer. That is why so many attics still feel vicious in July, even when there is insulation up there. A radiant barrier works differently. You staple the foil to the underside of the rafters. The reflective face points toward the attic space. You keep an air gap so the reflective mechanism can do its job. You do not simply throw it flat on top of existing insulation, because that changes moisture behavior and reduces performance. You overlap the seams. You cut it to fit, and in many average attics, a homeowner with a staple gun, a utility knife, and patience can do the work without bringing in a contractor. That is layer 2. Layer 1 tells the roof to absorb less heat. Layer 2 tells the attic to receive less radiant punishment from the roof structure. And once you put those layers together, the logic becomes complete. Now, you are not asking your air conditioner to do all the work at the end of the chain. You are shrinking the heat problem at the beginning and in the middle. It is not another little energy-saving tip. It is a correction 2D system. And this is where the deepest twist in the whole video lands. A lot of homeowners were effectively sold a solution to maybe 7% of the problem and told it was the whole answer. Add more insulation, upgrade the AC, seal the ducts, replace the equipment. Meanwhile, the roof stays dark, the attic stays loaded with radiant heat, and the AC is still forced to run long after it should have been given relief. That is why the bill stays high. That is why the machine never seems to rest. And that is why the source material makes such a big point about radiant barrier knowledge fading from mainstream residential training without ever being loudly disproven. However you frame that story, the practical result is the same. Too many homeowners never even hear about one of the most direct ways to cut radiant load in an attic. There is also a final scientific point that ties all of this together. Your air conditioner dumps heat sideways into outdoor air that is already hot. A bright roof surface does something different. It reduces absorption and radiates more of that thermal burden upward. That is why the source material brings in radiative sky, cooling logic, and modern high reflectance research. Deeper point is not that you need a lab-made miracle coating. The deeper point is that the white, reflective Amish-style logic was already targeting the right physical pathway long before most homeowners ever heard the phrase radiant barrier. So let's lock this in. If you want a cooler house with less AC strain, remember these 4 truths. Your roof is not passive. Most of the heat problem over your ceiling is radiant. The Amish approach works because it tries to stop the heat before it enters. And the 2 most practical moves are simple. Brighten and reflect the roof surface, and block radiant heat under the rafters. That is the real shift. Cool the house earlier, not later. Now the 3 deadly mistakes. Deadly mistake 1. Treating the attic like it does not matter. People never measure attic temperature. They never think of the attic as an active heat source. They act like heat above the ceiling is somehow less real because nobody sleeps up there. That is an expensive illusion. Deadly mistake 2. Upgrading the machine before fixing the surface. Bigger AC. New HVAC. More money. Some other roof. Same radiant load. Same attic furnace. You are not solving the source. You are just asking a stronger machine to survive the same bad fight. Deadly mistake 3. Using insulation as if it solves the whole problem. Insulation matters. But if you do not understand the difference between conduction, convection, and radiation, you end up over-trusting one tool and underfixing the pathway that is actually cooking the house from above. Here is the recap worth saving. Roof can act like a heat source. Radiant heat is the real enemy over your ceiling. Amish cooling logic is not magical old-world wisdom. It is a refusal to invite heat into the structure in the first place. And if you want the most practical low-cost path forward, it starts with 2 actions: a more reflective roof surface and a radiant barrier below the rafters. That is the system. If you have ever put a thermometer in your attic during the hottest week of summer, drop that number in the comments. I want to know what people are actually seeing above their ceilings. And if you have ever tried a white roof coating, lime wash, or radiant barrier foil, share your before and after. The best part of a topic like this is when homeowners compare notes and expose how much of the modern cooling bill is really just the price of not fixing the roof system early enough. Because once you realize how much of modern comfort is just paying a machine to fight a problem the house should have prevented, you start seeing the rest of the house differently too. And that is exactly where we go next.